displaced people who continue to flee the fighting in the east, in addition to those who continue to leave Crimea, and it makes recommendations to the government to address the outstanding issues. Currently, there are 101,670 internally displaced persons in Ukraine, according to the United Nations Refugee Agency. This is an increase of more than 15,000 IDPs in the 2 weeks since the report was written.
Let us begin by asking a simple question that plenty of Americans want the answer to. And they want it now instead of waiting the usually politically correct years and eons. Why should we care what happens in the Ukraine? Why should we be the ones to slap some muscle on the Russian bear and seek to make Vladimir Putin come into line, especially when you consider no one else in Europe seems to have the backbone to get it done? Welcome back to MidPoint, the senior economic consultant for Euro-Pacific Capital and one who has a hearty grasp on that part of the world and how it reaches around the globe. John Browne joins us. John, good to see you again.
Good morning, John. Very good to see you, crew.
Here we go again. Now, here is the very simple question up front. The Telegraph reporting this morning that according to a well-placed source in Washington, there is a growing disillusionment with the erratic antics of Vladimir Putin. Why should anyone trust this guy at this point? And is it fair to say that the possibility at least exists that we have a madman sitting in the office who will do what he wants, when he wants, and doesn't give a damn what the rest of the world thinks?
Well, I think it's quite ridiculous to think that he'd be mad. I mean, to have got where he's got in the Soviet Union requires great brain and subtlety. You don't get anywhere in a communist system without being clever. And he was a colonel in the KGB. I mean, this is a man of considerable stature. He has enormous support within the Soviet Union, or Russia rather, sorry, former Soviet Union. And I think it would be a big mistake to underestimate him. He is, Russia was never conquered. President Reagan, who I call the Great, won the Cold War, but we never actually conquered Russia. And so it's very similar to Germany exactly 100 years ago, or in the 30s. We never conquered Germany in the First World War. We beat them in military and they surrendered. And they always smarted under the treaty that was imposed upon them with reparations and everything like that. And that gave birth to Hitler, who was also no fool. And what we've done now with Russia, by going in, trying to stop them get into the Crimea back, a vital interest to them, just as Cuba was a vital interest to the United States under Kennedy, we've aroused a problem. We've created a problem for Russia, and Putin is no pushover. And he's resisted, and we have an administration that goes around shouting and bullying people all over the world, but it's not carrying a big stick. We're carrying a twig. The administration's hollowed out our military, and we're looking very weak. And from weakness, we're shouting more and more desperately. I mean, the fining of a French bank, 9 billion, causes enormous resentment in one of our key allies, France. The spying on the Germans causes great resentment from the Germans. And I hear that Merkel, when she talks to Putin, she speaks in Russian, he speaks in German. Now, we should be very careful of that, because Germany is the key swing power in this power struggle that's going on in the world now.
Well, I want to interrupt you there, and what has happened here apparently this weekend is Putin failed to return several phone calls from Merkel, so now all of a sudden the Germans may be now thinking perhaps we need to do something here. And I don't want to overplay the fact. When I say madman, I don't want to consider somebody running around in his underwear screaming and hollering at 2 o'clock in the morning. But I still want to consider the fact, and there are people in these different think tanks who say that certainly he's KGB, certainly he's smart, but this is a guy that, if you were to look at world leaders bent on domination, they have a plan, they know where they're going. Some people feel that there is no plan with this guy, that he is frankly the nut job who could do something that no one expected and plunge this world into a real conflagration somewhere down the line. You don't see that at all. You think that that simply doesn't happen here with this guy.
Well, I've met Putin once, but very briefly, sort of shake hands, not to really talk, so I can't say that I'm speaking from inside knowledge at all. But I do believe that he's a patriotic Russian. The Russians are proud people. They didn't like losing the Cold War. And he has enormous support for restoring, or at least maintaining, the old Russian Empire. And when we tread on their toes, he's going to react. Now, I think the downing of the Malaysian air flight myself was a complete accident. I think some rebel, Ukrainian rebel or that sort of person, fired the missile thinking he was hitting a Ukrainian transport plane.
A Ukrainian rebel who probably now is in Siberia somewhere and will never be heard from again.
I think liquidated myself, but still, it's a great embarrassment. Russia had no motive to shoot that plane. The rebels had no motive to shoot that plane down because they've lost. And part of the loss is the hardening of attitudes. Russia had successfully split Germany over the Ukraine and Crimea from America. Now this plane has rather united it again. Germany back with the United States. And as you say, Merkel is now not talking to Putin, as is part of the feeling over this huge movement of Germany as the key swing player, just as Russia was in the Second World War. Between Germany and the West, which side would Russia be on? Now it's which side is Germany going to be on? Is she going to go into this Eurasian group with Russia and China and break the US dollar and things, or is she going to swing back with the Anglosphere and support a dollar denomination?
I want to talk about Merkel in a sec, but I want to have everybody look at a quote today that came from Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, and this is in a briefing in Moscow reported by Reuters. Quote, Russian President Vladimir Putin has repeated many times that sanctions rarely reach their goal. In case of Russia, they will not achieve the goal by definition. We are not happy about it. The same applies to the European countries introducing these sanctions, and we know that. But I assure you, we will overcome any difficulties that may arise in certain areas of the economy. And maybe we will become more independent and more confident in our own strength. This is also good. Shall we just say that that is a wonderful paragraph of propaganda? It really doesn't mean much at all. And there now seems to be at least a thinking process, John, in Europe, that the European powers are willing to do something. Here's the big thing now, the EU sanctions. The triple lock is what they're calling. I'm sure you're aware of this as well. French, they demand to protect their defense contracts, which they have with Russia. They have ships that they're now delivering that are worth billions of dollars to them. German concern over reliance on Russian gas. British fears that sanctions would hit the city. Take those three, that triple lock right here. Is there any, and this is what Americans want to know, is there any reason to believe that these three countries are going to act in concert, get their backbone up, and basically say, we know we're going to take a hit, but we've got to stop this guy in his tracks sooner or later?
Well, if Russia was started to go into other states that are now free, like in the Baltics and Poland and things like that, I think the lock would immediately tighten. At the moment, it's tightening as a result of the downing of the Malaysian aeroplane. But I think basically all three countries do not want to be kicked around by the United States and just told what to do. They have their own interests. And they're growing. There's a split occurring between NATO allies and the United States. And people feel, as I said about the BNP fine of $9 billion on a French bank, they feel America's overextending its influence. I mean, even Israel, Israel's locked in a battle. I mean, I can't believe that the United States and Britain are not shouting in the United Nations for the United Nations to protect Israel when they're fired upon. But instead of that, whilst the British and European airlines were flying into Tel Aviv, America stopped its airlines flying to put pressure on Israel. And people resent it. And I think that President Putin or the ambassador saying that, it's, as you say, a wonderful piece of propaganda, but it is not just propaganda, because Russia has enormous resilience, as was proved in the 2 world wars. The Russian people can suffer. Russian people are in an agricultural state in a lot of positions. They grow their own food. They produce their milk and things like that to survive. And I think Russia could...
Countries into account here once again. We're talking about Britain, France, and Germany. Is it fair to say then, from what you've said, that maybe they look at America and go, look, we know the Ukraine is a tough situation. We know he's gone after Crimea. Just back off, will you, America? It's not that big a deal to go after Putin over something like this. Maybe you want to pick your fights a little better. Is that almost where they're at?
I think that's exactly where they're at.
So they're okay with the overtaking of Crimea. They're fine with it.
No, they're not fine. But it's just that they recognize that it's the same similar issue to Cuba was in the United States. Cuba was assaulted by Khrushchev, and it's a vital interest of the United States, close to America. President Kennedy had to win, even if it meant going to all-out war. Crimea was the warm water port for Russia. She has to win. Plus, she's got domestic support. Now, Britain is different to the other three. Britain is firmly locked in with America in the Anglosphere. So, and the city and things like that. The city is worldwide interest, and it would hurt the city, but not tremendously. Nothing near as serious as the gas cut off to Germany. So I think Britain is slightly different to the other three and would be much less fighting against the United States. But the others, they resent America kicking them around, really.
It's almost to the point where Crimea is bad, but it's not worth starting a war over, is what they'd like to say. If they could say it out loud to the president in one line,
exactly.
They'd say it that way.
Just like Cuba was to Khrushchev. Khrushchev had to back off.
Okay, John, it's always a pleasure to have you in here. Please, maybe we'll come in. Maybe we'll come in and we'll do something nice. We'll say something nice about Putin. Not gonna happen. Not on this show. Not where we tell the truth. That is not going to happen here. Whew. All right, next up. Must we always be bombarded with talk of how we need to hate the rich, especially when those who complain are often loaded with cash themselves, including one guy with 9 homes? That's going to be a focus as we continue right here on MidPoint, where every day we question everything.